All right, in this video, we're going to talk about why Georgi CADORETTE is probably going to get destroyed by Levan in December in just a little bit here. And in order to explain this, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Hermes Gasparini versus Georgi CADORETTE. Now, this match is not going to directly translate for a few reasons. Firstly, Hermes does have a shorter arm than Levan Saginishvili, as far as I'm aware. And secondly, Georgi supposedly was pretty sick during this match. I do think he's better now than he was. But these factors probably won't make all that big of a difference, because what we're going to talk about in this video is the stylistic technique that Hermes used against Georgi. And this is something that Levan can totally do. He's very capable of doing this, and it all has to do with the setup and the lane that Hermes is going to take against Georgi. So we've talked before in plenty of other videos how sometimes there's this idea that a flop presser is just so strong that even though he doesn't have his wrist, he can still beat his opponents. But as we've seen, this is really not the case. A lot of times, if a flop presser actually goes into a hook, they get destroyed. And so it's not just that they're so strong they don't need their wrist, but they actually don't want their wrist. Because what they're doing is they're shoving their wrist knuckle underneath their opponent's hand. And by doing this, they're going to cause their opponent to be overpronated. And when their opponent is overpronated, they're going to lose the vast majority of their shoulder commitment and their side pressure, and even their elbow flexion. They're also going to be in a position where their radial deviation or their wrist rise doesn't really work anymore. And you'll see that whenever Georgi puts someone on their bicep, it just looks like they have no power and they don't know what to do. And that's because that's exactly what's going on. So what does Hermes do against Georgi in this match to destroy him so comfortably? One of the most important things is notice how low Hermes is gripping Georgi. Notice that meaty part, you can see it right here in between Georgi's arm and the rest face, right here, the meaty part of Hermes' pinky pad. And notice how it is below the wrist knuckle of Georgi CADORETTE. This is super, super important, and we're going to get right before the go. So notice how low Hermes' pinky pad is. Notice how there is a gap right here between Hermes' bottom knuckle, his bottom finger, and Georgi's wrist. Hermes is creating that gap on purpose because he's achieving a super deep grip. And another thing that is very important is notice how there is a huge amount of contact between Hermes' forearm and Georgi's forearm. This is a match that is starting wrist to wrist. It is not starting palm to palm, but it is starting wrist on wrist. And what this means is that it is completely impossible for Georgi to shove the bottom of his palm underneath Hermes' wrist or underneath Hermes' hand, because that's normally what Georgi would do, is he would shove the bottom of his palm underneath Hermes' arm, but he can't do it because he's just going to shove it right into Hermes' forearm. It's just going to hit that. Georgi never is going to have enough wrist extension in terms of his muscle to literally just overpronate Hermes by the musculature in his wrist extensor. The way that he does it is by using his whole body to shove the bottom part of his palm underneath with his press. He shoves it underneath Hermes' arm. But Hermes is simply using this wedge of his forearm to block that, to where when Georgi tries to shove that bottom part of his palm, it just hits and bounces off of Hermes' forearm, and then we know what happens. He just completely runs right over him. And you can see Georgi hitting, and you can see he even potentially tries to flop underneath Hermes, but it's just completely pointless because he's just running right into Hermes' forearm. There's no way he's going to put Hermes into an overpronated position from here. You can see Hermes just controlling everything. So basically, Hermes just hooks him, and then once he low grips him and hooks him from there, if he wants to, he can even top roll from that position, from that low grip, because he's not going to get overpronated from a low grip like this. And one of the key factors in being able to achieve this is having really strong cupping, because he needs to be able to control the pronator of Georgi CADORETTE. And this is where Levan is going to shine. Levan's cupping is even stronger than Hermes. I think it's significantly stronger than Hermes. And people give Levan a hard time for not being a technical arm wrestler, but this is just not the case. I think he's a very technical arm wrestler, and he might even be better than Hermes. It's hard to say. Both of them came up from lighter weight classes, and so they have that ability to pull against people who are stronger than them, or at least they had that in the past. And generally, when people have the ability to do that, they do well when they go up to the heavier weight classes. But I think that Levan can do this exact same thing that Hermes did, only better, as far as the technique goes, as far as the conceptual part of it goes. Now, there are some potential issues that Levan might run into. And I think the biggest issue he could run into is just being a little bit too big. And you can see it even more clearly from this angle. Look at how low Hermes is. His wrist is completely touching Jerry's wrist, taking a super deep grip. He's setting up to hook Jerry. And even from that hook position, he can still top roll if he wants. But you can see wrist on wrist contact, and that is the key. You need to make it to where it is completely impossible for the flop presser to slip underneath your arm. And you do that by having wrist on wrist contact. And sometimes it's actually a little bit shocking how low you need to grip, because flop pressers are really good at getting underneath. But if you go low enough, it's just biomechanically impossible for Jerry to get underneath at that point. And that's what Hermes did. So this is exactly what I think Levan should do. And like I said, Levan probably has more back pressure, more side pressure, and I think certainly more cupping than Hermes Gasparini. He has a much bigger hand and also a much wider hand, which means he will be gripping Jerry even lower than Hermes gripped Jerry. So in all likelihood, I think it's going to be very difficult for Jerry to slip underneath to even get to straps, and I think it's going to be really difficult for him to ever access his flop press move. So I think probably what is going to happen, and we see the exact same thing again here. This is a slight early start. And once again, you can just see Jerry getting an early start there, actually. As soon as we get the ready go, you'll be able to see once again the amount. And here, Hermes just straight up supinates. He hardly even ever rolls, and you can see Jerry trying to flop his own wrist back. His fingers even come off of Hermes' arm because he's trying to flop his own wrist back so hard and get underneath. But he just can't do this. So like I said, I think in all likelihood, if Jerry is going to want to beat Levan, he is going to have to beat him in this lane right here. He's going to have to straight up press him with wrist control or beat him in a hook. And to me, the idea that he's going to beat him in a hook is very unlikely. Now, there is something that is going kind of in Jerry's favor against Levan as opposed to Jerry versus Hermes, and that is just the fact that Levan is so much bigger than Hermes. It's actually maybe going to be difficult for him to get so close to his arm. And when you're further away from your arm, it is more likely that Jerry is going to be able to isolate that bicep. We have a bunch of false starts here. And we see one more time. It is potentially more likely that Levan cannot get so close. Maybe he has about a 90-degree forearm angle in relation to his elbow flexor. And so maybe Jerry's going to have a slightly higher chance of getting onto that bicep. But still, I think the problem remains of Levan's hand even being wider. I think it's just going to be really hard for Jerry to get underneath. And I think that whatever Jerry does, if he ends up supinated and cupped, I think Levan's just going to destroy him in a hook. He's going to have to get into that flop press position, cause Levan to be overpronated, where he loses his radial deviation. He loses access to shoulder commitment, side pressure, and back pressure. If Jerry does that, if he catches that flop press just perfect, Levan could be in trouble. But honestly, I think that if that's going to happen, I feel like Levan just has to make a huge mistake and try to top roll him or try to take a high grip and low hand top roll him or something crazy like that. But I just can't imagine that Levan is going to make the mistake. And I think I've even heard him in a podcast saying he is planning to hook Jerry CADORETTE. So I think that if Levan takes a low grip and hooks him, it's hard for me to see how Jerry could ever even access his flop press. And because of that, I think he probably doesn't really have a chance in this match. But let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think that Levan is going to use the same strategy as Hermes? Do you think that he will prevent Jerry from ever accessing the flop entirely? Or do you think we're going to see something a little bit different? Maybe Jerry CADORETTE will shock the world after all. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later.